Hey guys, tonight we follow a god through the olive-lined paths of ancient Greece, but not one of those stoic thunderbolt-wielding types. No, tonight you're trailing behind Dionysus, the wine god, the patron of theater, of revelry, of making a mess look holy. And instead of soaring through the clouds or appearing in a flash of gold, Dionysus plods along slowly, audibly, atop a donkey that snorts at rocks and occasionally veers off the path for no reason at all. It's twilight. The air smells of crushed time and something fermented. And you're about to learn why a literal deity decided that donkeyback was the only way to travel. You probably won't survive this, mostly because if you do, I'll just loop the video until your brain gives up and drifts off, which is the whole idea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is as you listen. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself on a quiet path just before dawn, somewhere in the Peloponnese. The air is cool but sticky. Everything smells vaguely of grapes, pine sap, and someone's spilled wine. And then you hear it, a bray, loud and opinionated. You glance over and, yes, that's him. Dionysus, draped in purple robes that have clearly seen better parties, climbing awkwardly onto a donkey who clearly doesn't want to be climbed on. You'd think gods would choose something a little more divine. A flaming chariot, a lion-pulled sleigh, maybe a chariot with Bluetooth. But no, this guy, this half-mortal, half-miracle, fully unpredictable god, insists on trotting from city to city at donkey pace. And this isn't just a one-time joke. He does this regularly. Think of it as divine commitment to the bit. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or just Dionysus being Dionysus. Some say the donkey ride represents humility. Others claim it's a deliberate reversal of status, a god choosing the mount of farmers and fools over anything majestic. There's even a fringe theory involving donkeys as fertility symbols, but that road gets weird fast. Anyway, the donkey's name is possibly Myris, or maybe Onos, or maybe he never got named because Dionysus forgot between festivals. You watch them wobble along a narrow road shaded by fig trees. The god hums a tune that might be a hymn, or just something he made up on the spot. His crown of ivy slips sideways. The donkey tries to bite a shrub, and this somehow is divine progress. You trudge behind them, noticing the way Dionysus doesn't rush, ever. The pace is meditative, annoying, and perfect for a bedtime story. And oddly, people seem to expect him. A farmer dozing on his cart gives a sleepy wave. A child runs up with a cup of watered wine. The donkey sneezes, then accepts a carrot with regal indifference. You wonder, why this route? Why not teleport? Like Hermes? Why not ride a leopard like in some of the old vase paintings? Well, turns out those leopards were mostly symbolic and also terrible with uneven terrain. The donkey, while less dramatic, had stamina, attitude, and zero sense of urgency. Exactly Dionysian. There's a strange comfort in the rhythm of hooves on dust. And Dionysus talks to the donkey like an old friend. He tells it stories, comments on the color of the sunrise. Once he leans down and says, "Did I ever tell you about the time I turned pirates into dolphins?" The donkey flicks an ear. You nod, even though he wasn't talking to you. A mainstream historical fact for your sleepy brain. In actual Greek festivals honoring Dionysus, processions often included actors dressed as satyrs and gods, sometimes on donkeys. It wasn't just a party. It was a mobile myth acted out across the land. Walking, singing, drinking, pretending. Essentially ancient street theater with more goatskins. Meanwhile, the road curves. You pass a broken shrine, half swallowed by ivy. Dionysus pauses. He lights a sprig of dried herbs, frankincense maybe, and tosses it gently onto the altar. Smoke curls up lazily, like it's too tired to go vertical. The donkey chews something that might be someone's offering. You keep going. Time stretches, like melted wax. Somewhere in the background, a lyre is being plucked badly. You think you see a satyr dancing with a tree. Could be imagination. Could be wine fumes. One fringe scholar once claimed Dionysus chose the donkey because it offered no illusion of speed or escape. You ride it, and you confront everything slowly, your thoughts, your mistakes, that awkward thing you said to Apollo. Last week, the donkey lets nothing be rushed. In a world of impulsive gods and flaming swords, that's kind of revolutionary. The sun peaks up finally, turning the road pink and gold. Dionysus lifts a wineskin and takes a swig, then pours a bit. Onto the road for the spirits, or maybe just for the ants. The donkey poops, sacred moments all. You're not quite sure if this is pilgrimage, parade, or prank, but as you walk alongside them, there's a strange stillness that settles into your bones. The kind of calm that only happens when nothing is urgent, no one is winning, and a divine man on a stinky donkey waves at a crow like it's an old drinking buddy. And somehow, that's the start of the story. The morning deepens. A soft haze lifts from the fields around you, dew slick and glistening like spilled silver. Dionysus hums a few notes, off-key but committed, and pats the donkey's flank like he's congratulating a fellow conspirator. You follow at an unhurried pace, your sandals crunching along the pebbled road that winds toward a low hill. The kind of hill that offers no reward at the top, just more walking. Dionysus seems thrilled by this. He leans back lazily in his saddle, which is really just a folded goatskin, and peers at the horizon like he's expecting it to offer him wine. And maybe, to his eyes, it does. The donkey trudges, ears flopping, eyes half-lidded. You imagine it has developed a coping mechanism after centuries of being ridden by a wine god with no clear sense of direction. Probably dreams in circles, probably resents Pegasus. And yes, before you ask, donkeys were very much a real part of Greek daily life. Used for hauling, carrying, even sometimes as offerings. In fact, one mainstream historical tidbit: during certain rural Dionysian festivals, farmers would decorate their donkeys with wreaths and bells, then parade them through town like VIPs. You picture it now, tiny hooves jingling, Dionysus waving dramatically from the world's slowest float. The path narrows as you reach the hilltop. Below, a grove of olive trees stretches out like a silver-green sea. Dionysus gestures grandly and says, "That's where I turned a poet into a shrub." You blink. He doesn't explain. Historians still argue whether these wandering tales of Dionysus are myth layered over movement or movement layered over myth. Was he a traveling god because he needed to spread his cult? Or did his cult become a moving one because he couldn't sit still? Hard to say. Harder to ask when he's busy yelling at a squirrel. You descend into the grove. The light grows speckled, dappling through twisted branches that look as old as time. The donkey slows to a crawl. Dionysus hops off and begins walking beside you, barefoot. His robe snags on a bramble, but he doesn't seem to notice or care. "Let them snag," he says. "Snags make the fabric honest." You smile. You're not sure why. Here in the olive grove, the air smells sharper, green and briny. Dionysus picks a fruit, bites into it, makes a face, and throws it at a bush. Still raw, like some mortals. He winks at you, as if you're meant to. Write that down. You come across a small overgrown shrine, no bigger than a chicken coop, really. Inside, a crude statue of Dionysus carved from old wood and moss. Someone's draped a garland of garlic over it. "Protection," Dionysus mutters, "or seasoning." He kneels, mutters something in an older tongue, and pours out a splash of wine from a flask that never seems to empty. The donkey watches, unimpressed, then finds a patch of clover and immediately starts snacking. You pause too. It's quiet here, but not dead. The kind of quiet that breathes. The wind shuffles the olive leaves. Somewhere a goat makes a sound like an old hinge. A bee buzzes too close, then vanishes. You feel like you've entered a moment that has no edge. And that's when Dionysus sits down and pulls something from his satchel, a small leather pouch filled with dice. He starts rolling them in the dirt. "Oracle practice," he says. "The gods rarely answer directly, but they love numbers." You peer at the dice. They're carved from bone. The numbers are dots. Some of the dots look suspiciously like tiny grapes. He tells you casually that sometimes he travels just to shake up the omens. Cities get lazy with their rituals. You can't expect good wine if you water it too long. So I walk, I ride. I visit, I remind. You ask without asking why the donkey. He shrugs. Because it doesn't rush, and neither should you. And that might just be the whole point. A fringe belief held by a few Hellenistic poets claimed that Dionysus's donkey had the power to slow time around it, an idea probably born after someone drank too much Ritsina and lost track of 3 hours during a religious parade. Still, you feel it, every moment stretching like taffy, or a nap in progress. The god lies back in the grass and points to the clouds. He names them. That's Retsinos. That's Jesus. That one looks like a plate. You lie back too. The donkey walks a tight circle and plops down beside you with a gusty sigh. For a moment, there's just sky and breath, and the strange sense that nothing important has ever been urgent. Dionysus plucks a reed and begins to whistle. Badly. He offers you wine from his flask. It smells like berries and summer and something. Much older. You take a sip. Your teeth tingle. The horizon goes fuzzy. You sit up and realize the olive grove has disappeared. You're somewhere else. The donkey is already walking again. The landscape has changed while you weren't looking. The soft olive groves are gone, replaced by tall, thin pines that reach into a sky now stained with gold. It's either late afternoon or some trick of Dionysus's wine flask reality. Hard to tell. The air smells like resin and wild thyme. Cicadas scratch out their eternal string section in the background. And the donkey plods forward like it's seen this forest 1,000 times and has never once been impressed. You walk behind. Dionysus ahead of you now, singing something wordless in a key that doesn't exist. His robe has picked up pine needles, a smudge of sap, and somehow a single fig. You wonder if it grew there just for him. This stretch of land feels old, not in the ruins and myths way, but in the way a half-forgotten memory sits behind your eyes, as if the trees remember stories you weren't supposed to hear. And Dionysus? He remembers all of them, or claims to. He pauses at a mossy outcrop and slaps it like it owes him money. Here, he says, I was once worshipped by a very serious group of nudists. They danced themselves into ecstatic fits and then fell asleep in piles. Every third Thursday. He laughs. Some called them a mystery cult. Others called them those loud people in the hills, depends who you ask. This is your mainstream historical fact of the section. Dionysian cults did in fact exist in various forms across the Greek world. Some urban and refined, others rural and less so. Ritual intoxication, ecstatic dance, and a general disregard. For polite society were not bugs but features. The point wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was transformation, a kind of divine shedding of the skin. Still, historians debate whether these rituals were truly religious experiences or just ancient excuses to party with official permission. Some say the trance dancing connected participants to divine realms. Others argue it was mostly wine, percussion, and peer pressure. You decide not to weigh in. The donkey, for what it's worth, looks deeply nonplussed. Further down the forest path you come upon a circle of blackened stones, an old fire pit. Dionysus stops and sits, uninvited. You do the same. There are charred fig stems and a burnt sandal buckle in the ashes. A good night, he muses, poking the coals with a stick. Except for Gregor, he tried to debate a tree and lost. He pulls something from the folds of his robe, a half-eaten honey cake. Offers you a bite. It's crumbling, sticky, absurdly sweet. You chew slowly while the god stares into nothing. People think ecstasy means joy, he says, but it really means stepping out of yourself. For better or worse, a bird calls above. A jay, maybe. Angry, always angry. You ask why he traveled so much. Why not stay in Thebes, his original city, and make people come to him? He raises an eyebrow. Because movement is worship. Stasis is forgetting. He leans closer, wine sweet, breath against your cheek. Besides, donkeys don't like stairs. You resume walking, following a dry creek bed now. Pebbles crunch beneath your feet. Dionysus tells you that once he took a dozen priests on a walking pilgrimage across Anatolia. By the third day, 2 had run off with shepherds. 1 had joined, to a pottery commune, and the rest were arguing over whether pine cones or ivy made better headpieces. I encouraged it, he says proudly. Chaos is fertile. That's your fringe tidbit for this section. Some ancient sources claim that Dionysus's most devoted followers didn't just celebrate him, they often left their homes entirely, taking up wandering lives, breaking social ties, becoming maenads, or initiates who existed somewhere between society and wilderness. It was religious rebellion on foot, and occasionally barefoot. The donkey, clearly embracing this philosophy, chooses to veer off the path and walk through a bramble. You follow, because apparently that's what you do now. The forest opens suddenly onto a clearing. There's a small spring-fed pool ringed by rocks and overgrown herbs. Dionysus sighs like he's just stumbled onto paradise. Time for a foot. Soak, he says, and plunks his legs into the water with a splash. The donkey drinks. You find a dry spot and sit. Your feet thank you. The light fades to a lavender wash. Fireflies blink lazily. A frog burps. Dionysus lies back and recites a bit of poetry, badly but passionately. It's about rivers, desire, and someone named Calliope who may or may not have been a fig tree in disguise. Then he's quiet. And so are you. The kind of quiet where your thoughts stop trying to narrate themselves. Just breeze, just frogs, just water on skin. Eventually he stands. His robe is soaked up to the thigh. He doesn't care. Come, he says, tossing the last crumbs of honey cake into the pool. Let's find the place with the stone faces. They owe me an apology. You. Don't ask why, you just follow. Because somehow that's what makes sense. The path turns from earth to stone without warning. One moment you're walking on soft pine needles. The next your steps click and echo on ancient flagstones peeking through the soil like old bones. They stretch ahead in a winding pattern, interrupted by gnarled roots and sunken moss. Dionysus beams like he's just rediscovered an old friend. Ah, the road of almost memory, he says, half forgotten, half pretending to be forgotten. He doesn't explain what that means, and honestly, it feels better not to ask. The donkey trots ahead, oddly focused, like it remembers where it's going. You glance around. The trees are thinning, traded for squat laurel bushes and jutting rocks. The air tastes like chalk and sage. Somewhere distant a sheep bleats, or maybe that was Dionysus. You come to a wide, low hill scarred with carved stone heads, dozens of them worn nearly featureless, embedded in the slope like the ghosts of theater masks. Mouths open, eyes round and eternal. Dionysus approaches. One pats it on its lichen-crusted cheek and says, "Apology accepted." You stand there baffled until he sighs. These are the faces of Naxos, or maybe Thebes. Honestly, everyone claims them. They say they were carved by early followers who tried to capture divine ecstasy in stone. He squints. Mixed results. This is your historical fact for the section. In various regions of the ancient Greek world, stone carvings, masks, busts, and face-shaped offerings were used in Dionysian ritual spaces, especially around theaters and sacred groves. Scholars believe they may have represented spirits, deities, or simply theatrical joy. Their exact purpose, still debated, as is everything else when Dionysus is involved. He leans toward one particularly noseless face. This one, he says, was a terrible singer, but a very good drunk. You move among the heads. Some are tilted as if listening. Others are half buried in grass, the weight of time and weather pushing them slowly into silence. Dionysus trails his fingers across them, murmuring names like Elia, Stratos, Mika the Loud. Real? Probably not. Believable? Somehow, yes. He flops down between two smaller heads and produces a wineskin from under his robe, like a magician pulling scarves. The donkey immediately perks up. "Not for you," Dionysus says, swatting it gently. "You have a long memory and a short liver." The wine smells like dates and cloves, probably older than the donkey itself. He takes a sip and passes it to Iot. Careful. This vintage once ended a wedding and started a cult. You decline politely. He shrugs and drinks more. The sun is a low amber coin now, just hovering on the horizon. Everything around you has gone golden, even the moss. It would feel sacred if it weren't for the donkey farting. Dionysus laughs. Nothing like holiness with a soundtrack. He stretches out, using one of the stone heads as a pillow, and begins a tale, part memory, part myth. He speaks of a night when he arrived in disguise at a festival thrown in his own honor. "They didn't recognize me," he says, mock-wounded. "Offered me watered-down wine and boiled cabbage. I turned their amphorae to vinegar and made their fig trees grow lips that insulted the host." He rolls over and grins. "They remember me now." This brings you to a curious tidbit from fringe scholarship. Some accounts suggest Dionysus often disguised himself when visiting festivals, judging whether people honored the spirit of the celebration rather than just the ritual. In one obscure source, he even punished a host by causing his entire banquet to sing mocking verses until he fled into the hills. Whether this was divine lesson or poetic prank remains, as usual, unresolved. The stone heads seem to smirk. Nearby, the donkey has begun chewing a laurel branch. You're fairly certain that's not part of its diet, but who are you to intervene in divine livestock choices? Dionysus gazes upward now, wine resting on his chest. The stars begin to prick through, the sky one by one. "They're late tonight," he murmurs. Lazy old lights. You sit beside him. The stone beneath you is warm from the day. Your legs are tired, but pleasantly so, the kind of tired that feels earned, even if all you've done is follow. A donkey through mythology. Dionysus speaks again, quieter now. They carved these faces to remember joy, to remind themselves that even the gods laugh, especially the gods. He glances at you, smile softening. Don't trust any story where the divine is always stern. That's just someone's guilt in a toga. Then, as if to prove his point, he burps dramatically and tosses the wineskin to the donkey, who doesn't know what to do with it but tries to look honored. The fireflies return. One lands on Dionysus's forehead. He goes cross-eyed, trying to look at it. "I name you Beryl," he announces, "protector of eyebrows. You lie back and let the sky fill your vision. The stars are more confident now. The wine-sweet air hums gently with unseen wings and ancient sleep." Historians still argue whether Dionysus was a god of madness or a god of release. But here, with stone faces watching and donkey sighing, it seems clear. Maybe it was always both. You follow Dionysus and his steadfast donkey down a winding valley path until you hear a peculiar sound, the gentle roar of water, only it isn't a stream. It's something far stranger, a fountain abloom with red wine. Imagine marble spouts, carved as grape clusters, wine flowing in gentle arcs into stone basins that glimmer like liquid garnets in the afternoon sun. And there, clustered around the edge, are villagers, faces flushed, robes stained, eyes wide with delight and confusion. You trudge forward, boots scuffing dust, watching as Dionysus strides up, arms wide, as though presenting the world's loveliest. Accident. The donkey pauses too, sniffing the air, nostrils flaring in appreciation. You haven't seen a gathering this intrigued since that time someone discovered seawater could cure blindness, which historians still argue whether was miraculous or merely poetic exaggeration. A local farmer, his tunic the color of russet, clay stares at Dionysus as though he's a particularly bold centaur. He lifts a chipped clay cup to taste the wine, wincing at its richness. "By Zeus's sandals," he mutters, "this is wine as wine should be." He sloshes the remaining, drops over his parched throat, then spills some on the fountain's rim in a sudden gesture of libation. You note the ritual. Many wine cults poured offerings to the earth, believing the soil itself reveled in the god's gift. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Ancient texts describe how in Dionysian festivals, Dionysia, wine, flowed freely, sometimes from temporary fountains, to symbolize the god's generosity and to bind communities in shared revelry. But this permanent village fountain? That's rarer. Local legend says Dionysus himself blessed the well's spring after a drought so terrible the olive trees wept. Whether that really happened, or someone just needed a story to explain fresh. Wine appearing in the trough is up for debate. You wander among the villagers, many of whom treat the fountain with a mixture of pious reverence and giddy amusement. A mother dips her child's finger in the wine and lets him taste. A tiny drop, obviously, but enough to make the boy's eyes pop. A poet recites impromptu verses, comparing the fountain to nectar of divine folly, while two goat herders challenge each other to see who can drink more without hiccuping. Their bleary laughter echoes against the limestone houses. Dionysus stands at the fountain's center, staff in hand, ivy wreath loose on his brow. He blesses each villager in turn with a drip of wine from his staff's tip. When it's your turn, he grins, lifts a liquor-red droplet with his fingertips and lets it land on your tongue. It tastes of honey and moonlight and something ancient that you can't name. You swallow, and a warmth unfurls in your chest, spreading outward like the slow caress of sunset itself. A quirky tidbit. Some isolated Greek villages maintained small spring-fed wine fountains well into the Roman era, not for daily drinking, but as seasonal rituals, spring equinox festivals where villagers believed the cold water of winter gave way to the warmth of summer wine. Whether those continued practices were pagan holdovers or early tourism ploys is something scholars still argue about. As the sun dips lower, shadows stretch long across the courtyard. Dionysus claps, and suddenly music erupts. A few rustic flutes, a hand drum, a trio of farmers-turned-musicians who somehow know the old revel songs. They strike up a tune that makes you want to stomp, but you're suddenly self-conscious. So you merely tap your foot, and the donkey, ever the showman, begins a slow, rhythmic bray that fits remarkably well. The villagers cheer. They pour more. Wine into cups, some for drinking, some for splash fights. A fellow offers you a cup. You hesitate, but when in Rome or Boeotia, you accept. The wine is smooth, with just a whisper of tartness. You sip, savor, then join in the laughter as someone wipes purple streaks across another's cheek. The donkey licks stray drops from the rim of a basin with delicate snout. Yet even amid this joyous chaos, there's purpose. Dionysus leans toward you and says, "These gatherings are more than merriment. They're communion." He lowers his voice. When people drink together, they share stories, secrets, burdens. They become brothers and sisters of the vine. Hey, it sounds profound. Something a god might say after a few goblets. You scan the faces around you. Sunburned farmers, linen-clad weavers, barefoot children, and feel the shift. It's true. For a brief time, this fountain becomes a thread tying them all together. Her slip of ritual that transforms simple water into something sacred. A scholarly debate simmers beneath this scene. Some believe these impromptu wine festivals reinforced social bonds in times of scarcity, while others argue they devolved into destructive brawls and overindulgence, hardly divine. Maybe both are right. Tonight, though, it feels like communion. The sky has darkened to deep violet when the music slows. Dionysus raises his cup, to the vine, to the earth, to asking no more than living. He drinks, then tosses the cup aside. The viner red water splashes the stones. One last time, the donkey brays in perfect rhythm with a flute. The villagers laugh, you laugh, and in that laughter is something sacred indeed. The morning after the wine fountain revelry, you awaken to a curious chorus. Not human voices, but goat bells tinkling in the distance. You stumble out of your makeshift lean-to and follow the gentle clatter until you come upon a small clearing, ringed by olive saplings. There, a troop of goats, half a dozen playful creatures with russet and cream coats, are dancing in a loose circle around Dionysus's donkey. Their hooves step lightly on the grass, tails flicking, heads bobbing, as though they too have tasted the spring's enchanted wine. You rub your eyes. Goats don't usually dance. Yet here they are in a spontaneous caper, their ears perked and their mouths agape in what appears to be goatlish laughter. You watch as one particularly spry billy goat rears up on hind legs, pirouettes clumsily, and lands with a triumphant bleat. The others follow suit, hopping and strutting as if auditioning for an amphitheater performance. It's absurd, it's delightful, and it's exactly the kind of scene you'd expect from the patron of theater and chaos. Dionysus stands at the clearing's edge, arms outstretched, encouraging the dance as though he's conducting a goat-sized orchestra. The donkey munches quietly nearby, eyeing the frolic with mild disapproval. You approach slowly, careful not to startle the troop. One goat prances over, sniffing your sandal, then skipping off again as the music of bells and braying grows more jubilant. You can't help but grin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Goats were central to many rural Dionysian rites, often sacrificed or led in procession. Their horns were sometimes used to craft ceremonial vessels, rita for pouring wine. The goat's association with Dionysus stems from ancient agricultural symbolism: fertility, vitality, and the untamed wild. But dancing? Well, that's where the myth bleeds into magic. You step into the circle and find your feet tapping, naturally, rhythmically, like your body remembers how to move in time to a melody you've never heard. One goat sidles up, nudges your kneecap with its velvet muzzle, and then bolts into the center, prompting a fresh wave of capricious leaps. You laugh, your voice blending with their bleats, a human note in this pastoral hymn. Yet, amid the joy, there's notice of something else. A pair of jealous goats on the outskirts, stamping their hooves in quiet indignation. They stand rigid, heads lowered, glaring at the revelry as if offended by such unbridled display. Their bells jingle out of sync, a mournful counterpoint to the frolickers. You sense they too crave the magic, but aren't quite sure how to join in without losing dignity. After all, identity matters, even for goats. Dionysus notices their tension and strides over, scooping up a leaf and tossing it gently toward the sulking duo. "Come on," he calls, voice soft. "It's all fine. No one judges a goat for dancing." The jealous pair exchange a glance, curiosity flickering in their eyes, then tentatively lift a foreleg and give a single hop. The others cheer, bleats rising like applause, and suddenly the clearing is full of spinning, braying, prancing animals. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some ancient writers recorded that goats, having lapped up wine-soaked herbs or trampled grapes left in the fields, could become tipsy, an observation often dismissed as travelers' tales. Yet in rural harvest gatherings, spilt wine was known to draw goats who would eat or drink their share and stagger about in a state of boozy disorientation. Whether these dancing goats are drunk or simply joyous remains an open question. Historians still debate whether such animal behavior inspired early dramatic performances, goats on stage wearing masks, or if theatrical goat mimicking was a human invention borrowed from pastoral observations. Perhaps the truth waltzes somewhere between inspired imitation and myth-making. You crouch low, offering your hand to a frolicsome kid. It sniffles, then noses your palm, its breath faintly sweet. You stroke its coarse hair, marveling at the tiny bell jingling against your thigh. The clearing feels like a pocket of enchantment, suspended between heaven and earth, where mortal, god, donkey, and goat share in a single hilarious ritual. Dionysus calls you over and hoists you onto a fallen log, creating a gentle amphitheater for your participation. He gestures grandly. Let the world witness that even the simplest creature can find divine rhythm. The goats answer with a jubilant charge, circling the log 3 times before settling into a synchronized stomp that shakes loose pine needles. You close your eyes, letting the bells and bleats wash over you. In that moment, the antics of the previous day, the fountain, the shrine, the trees, fade into a tapestry threaded with laughter and hoofbeats. Even the donkey reaches forward to nudge a dancing goat aside, as though to say, "I taught you this." As the sun climbs higher, casting dappled light across the clearing, you feel something loosen inside you. A tension you didn't know you carried releases in a burst of lightness. It's the goat magic, or the god's whimsy, or the simple truth that sometimes life demands you dance, no matter how ridiculous it feels. Eventually, the goats tire, dismounting from their dance to nibble on clover and rest their legs. The jealous pair, once aloof, stand contentedly beside the others, tails flicking in quiet satisfaction. Dionysus sweeps a hand through the air, applauding. "Bravo," he declares, "my 4-legged thespians." You clap too, joining in a final moment of communal affirmation. The clearing hushes as goats graze and the donkey brays softly in applause. Then Dionysus turns back to you, eyes bright. "Shall we move on?" he asks, voice gentle. "There's theater yet to come." You nod, heart light. The path beckons, again cradled in dust and sunbeams, and you follow, ready for the next scene in this slow-motion divine comedy. You trudge uphill as the forest gives way to open scrubland. and suddenly the world feels brighter, brighter and fresher, like the moment after you pull off damp socks. The donkey picks its way up rocky terraces, Dionysus slack-lipped with contentment, and you realize you're nearing the fabled island of loquacious donkeys. They say these creatures talk back. History's conventional view? Donkeys bray, period. But a handful of ancient travelogues claim these island donkeys formed entire sentences in the local dialect, mostly complaints about brambles and insufferable tourists. Tourists meaning intruding gods. Scholars still argue whether those accounts stem from genuine animal behavior or inebriated scribes trying to one-up each other at symposiums. You crest the final ridge to find a rocky plateau dotted with low stone walls and half-collapsed huts painted in sage and saffron. Dozens of donkeys stand scattered, ears twitching, eyes bright. A few bray greetings, others bray criticisms. Too slow. Where's my breakfast? Seen any better? Grass? Their speech is unmistakable in tone, if not in discernible words. Dionysus dismounts and claps his hands. "Welcome home, friends," he calls. Immediately, the island donkeys gather around, forming a loose semicircle that would shame any theatre. Troop. One donkey in particular, grey mane and wiry, steps forward and brays in a deliberate cadence. You swear it's saying, "About time you showed up." Dionysus laughs like a schoolboy. You stand there, mouth open, as another donkey voices concern about ritual license fees and unauthorized satyrs. Their brays blend into a low murmur that somehow feels conversational. One donkey flicks its tail and brays a single word. Performance? And Dionysus nods. A quirky local law notes that on this island, donkeys once held mock assemblies to decide festival dates and tax exemptions for olive farmers. Modern scholars debate whether this was a satirical ritual by humans or actual donkey meetings amplified by Dionysian magic. You're inclined to believe the magic. Now backstage at this rustic parliament, Dionysus holds court. He thumbs through a leather folder, yes, poring over parchments, naming each donkey's grievances aloud. They bray in chorus: road maintenance, hay prices, more ivy wreaths. The donkey you rode, your patient, stalwart companion, brays once, calmly, simply, "Why don't we just eat grapes?" The assembled donkeys fall suddenly silent, then erupt in braying laughter. Even Dionysus grins, folding the parchment. "Perhaps," he declares, "we eat grapes next week. Tonight we feast." A mainstream historical echo whispers here. In some Dionysian rites, community decisions were indeed made in festive gatherings, where the god's favor was invoked, though no human sources mention donkeys officiating. Fringe antiquarians speculate those accounts were allegories of democratic assemblies, but whether donkey brays ever translated to votes is as yet unresolved. Dionysus gestures to a set of wicker troughs heaped with grapes. The donkeys form a curious line, orderly for once, and begin munching. You join in, biting a plump berry, juice running down your chin. The donkeys send you nods of approval, if a donkey can nod. You realize you're witnessing civilization's most absurd council, a god and his divine beast bureaucrats governing festival plans with nothing but brays, grapes, and ivy crowns. And in that absurdity, there's profound humor, that governance needn't be so serious, that chief complaint might well be, we prefer wine over bureaucracy. Even the goats from the last clearing have wandered in, bleating agreement, and the scene feels like a grand play without an audience, except you. The donkey in the front raises a hoof as though to signal adjournment. Dionysus nods gravely and brays in return, likely party at dusk. As the sun lowers, shadows stretch long across grape-stained stones. The donkeys trot away, bellies full, to nap in the shade. Dionysus picks up his staff and climbs back onto your donkey. "Ready for Athens?" he asks. The donkey brays, possibly answering, "Only if there's more grapes." You mount behind Dionysus, heart lighter than ever, and follow the island's only paved path that leads down the cliff toward a hidden cove. Waves break gently below, promising more stories, and as you descend, you realize that the divine message here is simple. Sometimes, the wisest decisions come from the most unexpected. Voices, especially ones that bray. The road dips gently. curving through stands of olive trees and stone terraces laced with thyme. Cicadas drone in the warmth, their chorus rising and falling like breath. The path is dusted with golden soil that clings to your sandals, and you sense, before you even see it, that something grand approaches. The air tastes faintly of perfume and hot metal, then it appears. A gleaming cavalcade winds up from the east, sunlight catching on polished bronze and gilded trim. Horses prance in perfect synchrony, their manes plaited with ribbons and tiny bells that jingle with each step. Behind them, the carriages roll with regal poise, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship, with painted panels, embroidered awnings, and silk-draped footmen who sit like statues of reverence. At the center of the convoy is a truly absurd creation, an enormous ceremonial chariot carved from white cedar and trimmed in shell gold. It's a riot of grapevine scrollwork, theatrical masks and winged cherubs, all of it glowing faintly in the afternoon light. The wheels alone must weigh as much as a small temple. It glides forward like a floating shrine. Dionysus sees it and slows the donkey to a halt. For a moment, all is still. The donkey flicks one ear, unimpressed. You glance at Dionysus, expecting awe or at least curiosity, but he merely tilts his head and sighs. "Too shiny," he murmurs. The lead horseman signals for the convoy to stop, and a richly robed official, satrap by the look of his golden sash and very unnecessary diadem, hops down with ceremonial urgency. He approaches, cane in hand, and bows so low you think he might tumble into the dust. "O great liberator," he begins, his voice reverent, "accept this royal carriage, commissioned from the finest artisans in Syracuse, in honor of your journey. To Athens, let your divinity ride in luxury befitting the gods." Dionysus dismounts the donkey, barefoot as ever, and begins to circle the chariot like a lazy shark. He runs his fingers along the ornate edge of a wheel, examining the tiny satyr sculptures dancing in low relief. "Lovely carving," he muses. "A bit stiff, though. Satyrs don't usually wear that many pants." The satrap chuckles, uncertain. If this is a compliment. Dionysus turns his gaze to the inside of the chariot. Velvet cushions, a tray for fruit, even a goblet stand. It's a rolling banquet hall. He looks at you, then at the donkey, then at the satrap. "This thing turns, I assume?" he asks. "With precision, my lord. The axles are reinforced with bronze. The horses have been trained for only the smoothest gait." Dionysus leans against the wheel. It doesn't budge. He says. "Not terribly intimate, is it?" The satrap blinks. "My lord, I'm just saying," Dionysus continues, "there's a certain honesty in a donkey's walk. You feel each pebble. Every stumble is a little lesson in humility. This," he waves at the chariot, "is less a journey than a display window." The satrap, trying very hard not to look crushed, presses on. "But surely a god such as yourself deserves comfort, pomp, padding?" Dionysus raises an eyebrow. "You think a god who invented wine needs a cushion to get through life?" The donkey lets out a loud, sudden bray, half bleat, half belly laugh. The timing is perfect. You suppress a smile. Dionysus pats its neck. A mainstream historical fact trickles through your mind. Though the gods of Olympus were often depicted in majestic chariots, Apollo racing his across the sky, Athena standing tall in battle-ready bronze, Dionysus was usually shown differently. When he was in a chariot, it was often pulled by panthers, tigers, or sometimes satyrs, and occasionally very real, very stubborn donkeys. The imagery wasn't just mythic, it reflected a deeper philosophy, where the other gods sought order. Dionysus represented chaos, pleasure, and the dismantling of formality. Back on the road, Dionysus circles back to the satrap and smiles kindly. "I appreciate the gesture. Truly, but this," he points to the donkey, "has better jokes, and it sweats less perfume." The satrap's face twitches. "But it's..." He tries again, voice rising slightly. "It's tradition." Dionysus shrugs. "So is growing grapes upside down to confuse the gods of pestilence. Doesn't mean we should keep doing it." That gets a full snort from one of the footmen, who quickly turns it into a cough. The satrap adjusts his robe. He clearly wants to insist, but is caught in the dilemma of all mortals facing a divine contradiction. The donkey shifts and lifts one hoof, waiting. Dionysus climbs back on. The movement is smooth, practiced. He doesn't need help. He's clearly done this thousands of times. Once seated, he gives the satrap a parting smile. "Tell your craftsmen their detail work is exquisite," he says, "but no one ever sang hymns about the guy who rode in comfort." And with that, the donkey ambles forward. The satrap is left blinking in the road, his golden carriage gleaming uselessly behind him. The courtiers hesitate. One looks at another. Then a chuckle breaks free, followed by another. Laughter spreads, like ripples across the group. One even mutters, "Divine preferences, I suppose," and snaps the reins of his horse. The whole convoy begins to follow, but at a respectful distance, trailing the donkey like a humble royal retinue. A quirky, historical tidbit bubbles up. In some later Roman-era plays and satirical texts, Dionysus is cast not as the glorious liberator, but as a wine-sodden traveler who insists on riding in awkward, creaky carts or stumbling into towns on the back of an obstinate donkey. These portrayals were comic, but they hinted at a deeper, cultural truth. Divinity for Dionysus wasn't found in polish or pretense. It lived in the absurd, the unsteady, and the unexpected. Scholars still argue whether this irreverent image was the original conception of Dionysus or a later reinvention to humanize him for broader appeal. Was the donkey a comedic downgrade, or the true symbol of his philosophy all along? You keep walking, trailing the god who rides a donkey like a king rides legend. The heat eases slightly, shadows stretching across the path. The donkey snorts contentedly, a creature at home in its pace. Dionysus turns, glancing at you sideways. "You know," he says, "we once had a donkey that tried to argue with a philosopher." You raise an eyebrow. "He won," Dionysus grins, "by refusing to walk in circles." And just like that, the road continues. No fanfare, no glittering wheels, just dust, hoofbeats, and the stubborn poetry of small steps. The square empties slowly, like wine seeping into old stone, gradual, unhurried, and impossible to reclaim once gone. The sun has turned buttery, spreading warmth without insistence, and you trail after Dionysus as he makes his way out of the quay, city's bustle, and toward a quieter slope above Athens. It's not a place marked on any civic map. No shrine or temple, no inscriptions or columns, just a rise of land with wild fennel, rustling in the breeze, and a worn path that bends gently toward a small stand of pines. The donkey walks beside you, silent now, his steps oddly ceremonial. You've seen this gait before, at festivals, in funerals, in certain dreams you only remember in fragments. Dionysus carries nothing, no cup, no staff, just himself, barefooted and grape-stained, humming some ancient phrase you don't recognize. He stops beside a boulder shaped suspiciously like a reclining satyr and touches it with a kind of reverence. "This is where we part ways," he says, "not to you, but to the donkey." The donkey doesn't react. He just blinks slowly. Dionysus kneels and places both hands on the earth. He speaks a few words in a language older than vowels, something more sung than spoken. Then from the pocket of his robe, he pulls a wreath of crushed laurel and lays it at the donkey's hooves. A mainstream fact stirs. Some cults of Dionysus believed that animals, especially those who bore gods, became divine in their own right. A donkey who carried a god was not merely a beast of burden, but a vessel of mystery, entitled to rest in sacred ground. It's said that on certain spring nights, devotees would light fires on quiet hills to honor not just the god, but his animal companions. Dionysus rises, brushing soil from his palms. "He'll stay here," he says, eyes on the animal. "He's earned more than applause. He's earned stillness." You're about to ask if this means farewell when the donkey turns, just slightly, and noses Dionysus's hand, as if to say, "Go on then, I'll manage." The god smiles. Always the same, knows more than me, just says less. Then Dionysus looks at you. "You came the whole way," he says, his tone different now. Not theatrical, not drowsy, just present. You walked, you waited, you listened. Most don't. You want to say something, something clever or grateful or poetic, but all that comes is a nod. "It matters," he adds, "that you walked, and that's the phrase that sticks. Not just now, but later when you remember this. It matters that you walked. A fringe belief from an obscure philosopher lingers at the back of your mind. That Dionysus's slow, wandering pace wasn't a rejection of haste, but an embrace of presence. That divine revelation couldn't be summoned with speed, only stumbled into by those willing to go nowhere in particular. You watch as Dionysus turns away, robes fluttering like wine in wind, and begins to descend the hill alone. No cart, no fanfare, just a god with dirt on his feet and old songs in his throat. You remain. The donkey curls into the grass and exhales a sigh that seems to empty the whole hillside. A breeze tugs gently at the laurel wreath near his hooves. The fennel sways like a crowd waving goodbye. You sit down beside him. You don't speak, you just stay, because that's what you do now. And in the quiet that follows, the world continues, soft and unhurried, full of pauses and echoes and footsteps that don't need to lead anywhere. Wind down, 300 words. Let yourself settle now. Let the weight of sandals, the rhythm of donkey hooves, and the scent of wild thyme fade into the stillness of your breath. You've walked far, through fig orchards and pine groves, through the hum of festival squares and the hush of sacred hillsides. You've listened to laughter, to lyres out of tune, to poetry scribbled on wrinkled parchment. You've heard stories told in brays and half-remembered hymns. And now here at the end of it, there's no arrival trumpet, no curtain fall. Just this, a resting place, a soft patch of earth, a donkey snoring lightly beside you. Let your mind wander where your feet have already been. Back to the island where donkeys debated wine taxes, to the fountain that spilled too much joy, to the cliffs that echoed not just sound but memory. Let every thought stretch longer, lighter, like ivy curling toward shade. Let your limbs grow heavy, your eyes dim. Let your breath follow the slow, warm cadence of a procession that never needed to be fast, because sleep is a journey too, and you've earned your donkey's pace. Let it carry you now, gently, leaf by leaf, step by step, into dreams. You are here, and you are going nowhere at all. Good night. Later that night, long after the singing has faded and the donkey has fallen asleep with a daisy tucked behind one ear, you find yourself walking beside Dionysus again under a spill of moonlight. The village lies behind you now, soft and golden, in the valley like a half-remembered dream. The road ahead stretches into silver, its edges blurred by mist, and the god hums to himself, a quiet tune, half lullaby, half mischief. He suddenly pauses, patting the donkey's side absent-mindedly. Funny thing about donkeys, he says, as if you've been mid-conversation. You always think they'll stick close until they don't. You tilt your head, unsure what he means, until he turns and points behind you. The donkey is gone. Your mouth opens. But wasn't he right next to... He does this sometimes, Dionysus says, not looking worried. Disappears, takes a detour. Probably found a fig tree he liked. You both stand in the quiet, looking up and down the moon-washed road. Not a bray in earshot, not a hoofprint in sight, just you, the god, and the sound of wind rustling through distant reeds. Should we look for him? You ask, already scanning the horizon. Dionysus sighs. Technically, yes, but he always finds his way back, usually. He begins to walk again. You follow. It's not long before you arrive at a crossroads where a small shrine perches on a flat rock. A low three-sided box of carved cedar filled with offerings, coins, figs, and inexplicably, a polished spoon. Above it, a painted image of a donkey, quite clearly Dionysus's own, stands in a regal pose, ivy behind one ear and one hoof slightly raised. Someone has even added a tiny gold earring to the painted ear. Dionysus raises an eyebrow. I didn't commission this. He crouches beside the shrine and picks up a folded bit of parchment wedged between two olives. It's a letter, smudged and half-faded. He squints, reading aloud, "To the donkey of the wandering god. Thank you for carrying him safely through our fields. We hope he steps gently wherever he goes." He smiles. I think he got promoted. A mainstream historical fact unfolds in your memory. In some rural areas of Greece, spontaneous shrines were erected, not just for gods but for objects, events, or even animals believed to carry divine favor. Shepherds once placed wreaths on certain boulders, claiming a nymph once sat there. In this case, a donkey. But the impulse was the same: mark the sacred wherever it wandered. Dionysus stands. Still no sign of him, he says with a theatrical sigh. Should we panic yet? Before you can answer, a soft thud echoes through the trees. Then another. Hoofbeats, deliberate and slow. You turn toward the sound, and out from the mist emerges the donkey, head high, wearing a crown of lavender, and dragging something behind him with a rope clenched in his teeth. It's a small wooden cart. You blink. The cart is filled with grapes, just grapes, piled high with a note stuck to the front that reads, "To be pressed in Athens, courtesy of the Quiet Orchard." The donkey drops the rope with a grunt and stares at you both, expectantly. Dionysus raises both arms and exclaims, "He started a delivery business." You both laugh. The donkey brays proudly. A quirky tidbit dances to mind. A fragment from a now-lost comic play describes Dionysus's donkey going into business for itself, delivering grapes, ferrying minor satyrs, and occasionally hosting makeshift sermons. Most historians dismiss the fragment as parody, but here on this road it doesn't seem so far-fetched. "All right, partner," Dionysus says to the donkey, climbing aboard the tiny cart. The wood creaks under his weight. "To Athens, then. Slow and sweet, just like you prefer." He gestures for you to hop on beside him. You do, and together you ride along in a grape-filled cart pulled by a donkey who clearly understands his moment of glory. As the wheels turn over the gravel path, Dionysus leans back and says, "You know, the gods of Olympus never respected this one, always mocked him. Too small," they said. "Too plain. But I like things that move slowly, that don't need approval to be divine." The donkey flicks his tail in agreement. You watch the moonlight spill across the grapeskins, the world quiet but never silent, alive with the sound of movement without urgency. And somewhere behind you, another village will wake to hoofprints and crushed lavender, and wonder for just a moment whether they were visited by a god or simply a very determined donkey. By the time the procession thins and the sound of hooves fades into the distance, the land has shifted again. You find yourself walking along a sun-dappled slope toward a sleepy village tucked into the crook of a valley. Stone cottages with red-tiled roofs lean into each other like old friends. A few chickens peck lazily at the dirt. Somewhere a flute plays a scale, hesitant, like someone just learning. Dionysus lifts his head, sniffing the air like a hound, catching a scent. "Ah," he says, "here they remember." The donkey, who seems unimpressed by most things, actually speeds up. As you enter the village square, you notice something peculiar. At the center of the plaza, nestled between a communal well and an herb garden, stands a small, slightly uneven shrine. It's made of sun-bleached wood, decorated with grapevines and feathers. And at its center is not a statue of a god, or even a famous hero, it's a donkey. A lovingly carved wooden donkey, eyes wide and ears lopsided, crowned with ivy and daubs of ochre paint. You blink. "Is that?" You begin. "Yes," Dionysus replies, smiling. "That's my donkey, or a version of him." He hops off his very real steed, who snorts as if amused by the likeness. A few villagers glance up from their chores, spot Dionysus, and offer warm, sleepy waves, like someone greeting an uncle they see once a year, who always arrives barefoot and never writes. "Long ago," Dionysus says, brushing dust from the statue's ears, "they tried to build a statue of me. It toppled in a storm, but the donkey stayed upright. So they said, fine, we'll worship the donkey instead." He shrugs. "I wasn't offended." A mainstream historical note comes to mind. In certain regions of the ancient world, animals associated with gods were venerated in their own right. While cats were linked with Bastet and bulls with Zeus, there are obscure records of rural altars dedicated to donkeys, especially in Dionysian cults, where the beast represented earthy humor, patience, and stubborn transcendence. The villagers gather slowly, Children run up with wreaths of wildflowers. They drape one over the real donkey's neck, who bears it like a reluctant pageant winner. A baker offers Dionysus a loaf of bread shaped like a donkey's head. He bites into it without hesitation. You're handed a cup of honeyed wine and a small garland. It's sticky and fragrant and far too sweet, but perfect for the mood. Around you, people begin to arrange a makeshift circle. Someone produces a tambourine, another a lyre. There's no schedule, no ceremony, just instinct. The donkey statue watches serenely as the villagers begin to sing. Not hymns exactly, but story songs. Rhymed and ridiculous, they recount tales of the donkey's imagined adventures. The time it bested a centaur in debate, the day it convinced a cloud to rain only on rival crops, the legend of how it once brayed so loudly it scared off a war Dionysus beams like a proud parent. They've added stories every year, he says, and each one is truer than the last, even if none of them are real. You sip your wine. The sweetness lingers, warming your throat and loosening your thoughts. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In a few ancient harvest festivals, people staged comic plays where animals took center stage, not as mere props, but as characters of wisdom, mischief, or accidental heroism. The donkey in these tales often played the fool who turned out to be the wisest. Scholars still argue whether this was satire or soft theology, but one thing is clear. People remember the animal that made them laugh. A child clambers onto the real donkey's back, clutching a stick like a scepter. The donkey, to its credit, doesn't flinch. It simply turns its head, chewing a mouthful of lavender like this is all perfectly ordinary. Dionysus claps approvingly. He's very tolerant of cult activity, he says. It's why I chose him. You sit on a low wall beside a woman shelling almonds. She hands you a few, roasted and warm. He's visited before, she says quietly, not looking up. Never stays long, but the donkey always gets a garland. It's tradition. And just like that, a line forms. Each villager offers something. A fig, a flower, a small wooden token, and places it before the statue. Not because they're required, but because it feels good to give thanks to something that carried the god, steady and sure without complaint. Dionysus reclines beneath an olive tree, arms behind his head, watching the clouds. They'll keep this up all night if we let them, he says, grinning. And I might. The donkey's enjoying himself. He's right. The donkey is now lying in the shade, surrounded by offerings and admiration, chewing contentedly while a child braids ribbons into its tail. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows from the little shrine. The square hums with the easy peace of shared stories and familiar rituals. You lean back, full of bread and wine and almond warmth, and feel the edge of sleep press against your thoughts. And somewhere deep inside, you understand. This wasn't just about honoring a god. It was about honoring what carries us, what bears our weight without grandeur, the quiet things we ride toward joy. The cart creaks steadily under you as the sun rises slow and orange behind the hills, painting the road in long, syrupy shadows. The donkey doesn't hurry. He's on his own schedule, as always, ears twitching occasionally, but otherwise composed, like a creature who knows exactly how important he is and refuses to break a sweat over it. Dionysus is humming again, something off-key and ancient, a melody with no real shape, just rhythm and breath. He's reclining in the cart like it's a royal barge, grapes piled beside him like tribute. He tosses one lazily into his mouth every so often and makes vague pronouncements like too tart or this one tastes like ambition. The road is smoother now, lined with laurel bushes and the occasional stone marker etched with the names of old cities. One is cracked and weather-worn, reading only thens in flaking letters. You smile. It seems the donkey is on track, even if the signs are losing their memory. You pass a shepherd dozing beneath a fig tree, a flute resting in his lap. His sheep don't notice you. One goat does and gives the donkey a look that could be described only as professional envy. Dionysus waves sleepily and says, "Don't worry, friend, there's still room in the mythos for you." You lean back against the cart, lulled by the wheel's rhythmic thumps and the warm scent of sun-baked grapes. Somewhere nearby, bees hum, low over a wildflower patch. A hawk cries from high above, circling but uninterested in donkeys or gods. Dionysus sits up suddenly. "We'll be climbing soon," he says. "See those cliffs?" He points toward a rise ahead where the path curls, up into the hills like a lazy serpent. Perfect place for echoes and questionable music. You raise an eyebrow. "Questionable music?" He grins. "You'll see." The climb begins gradually, the donkey undeterred. His pace never changes, not even as the path narrows and turns stony. You feel the cart tilt, the grapes shifting with each step. Dionysus doesn't seem concerned. In fact, he's rummaging through his satchel and pulls out a small, crooked lyre. "I borrowed this," he says. "About a century ago. From a muse. She hasn't missed it, I think." He plucks a few notes. They sound like a harp that forgot it was supposed to be elegant. Still, he's persistent. He hums, strums, adjusts a string, strums again. Then he begins to sing. It's a kind of wandering chant, half recipe, half memory. He sings of lemon wine, of fig paste stolen from a jealous queen, of satyrs who dance too close to fire. His voice isn't good exactly, but it's rich with story. And the cliffs love it. They echo him back, sometimes mockingly, sometimes sweetly. "Wine," he calls, and the hills whisper, "Mine, mine, mine." "Grapes," he yells, and somewhere in the distance, the sound warbles back. "Rapes, apes, capes." He laughs so hard, he nearly drops the lyre. The donkey snorts, unimpressed. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In some mountain festivals honoring Dionysus, particularly in rural Thrace, echoes were believed to be the god responding. People would sing into canyons or ravines, and when the earth answered, it was a sign he was listening, a beat, or laughing. As Dionysus continues his musical assault on the landscape, you start to notice the satyrs. They're not entirely visible, more like suggestions of movement. A tail flicking behind a rock, hoofprints where there were none a moment ago, a laughter that doesn't quite belong to anyone present. Dionysus waves casually toward a cluster of pine trees. "Ignore them, they're recovering." "From what?" you ask. He raises an eyebrow. "From last night." A quirky fringe belief comes to mind. Some local traditions held that satyrs would follow the god at a distance during his travels, appearing only when it was safe to celebrate again. Usually, after the divine hangover had passed. Whether they were real or metaphorical remains a debate, but travelers reported glimpses in the cliffs, laughter in the rocks, and the scent of old wine in impossible places. You crest the final slope, the view opening into a wide ledge where grapevines cling to the rock like spiderwebs made of green. Dionysus leaps from the cart with surprising agility and walks to the edge, arms spread wide. "Athens is just beyond that ridge," he says, "but we'll wait. The donkey deserves a break." You hop down, brushing dust from your legs. The donkey settles into a patch of time and rolls over dramatically, as if to say, "Yes, finally." The cliffs curve around the ledge like an amphitheater, and Dionysus begins to sing again, this time a slow, slurred song about someone named Melanthios who tried to ferment chestnuts. The echoes roll back softer now, humming like old lullabies. You lie on your back in the grass, eyes on the pale blue sky, and feel the moment stretch long and quiet. Dionysus sits beside you, plucks a final chord and says, "The trick, you," so is not to arrive too quickly. You glance at him, he smiles, eyes half-lidded. Even the gods need time to admire the climb. You wake from a nap you didn't realize you'd fallen into, your cheek pressed against the cool stone ledge, the scent of crushed thyme still on your fingers. The sun is lower now, a soft honey hue bathing the cliffs. The donkey is snoring, gently beside you, legs folded under like a settled boat in calm water. Dionysus hasn't moved much. He's propped against the cart, a grape stem dangling from his mouth, staring out at the ridge that hides Athens from view. He doesn't look in any rush to cross it. You stretch, bones clicking like distant temple bells, and walk to the edge. Below, a scattering of olive groves and whitewashed houses shimmer in the distance. Athens is close. Close enough that you can almost hear it. Distant conversation, market stalls, sandals on marble. But Dionysus shows no signs of moving. "Shouldn't we?" You start. He holds up a finger. Not yet. Something's missing. You look around. The donkeys. Here the grapes are intact, the lyre's still technically an instrument. Dionysus nods. Yes, but there's something else. He pulls from his satchel a faded journal bound in olive leather. The corners are dog-eared, the spine chewed, possibly by the donkey. He flips through pages filled with blotchy sketches and looping handwriting, murmuring to himself. I knew it, he mutters finally. This spot, this very ledge. I once came here with an old oracle. She swore the cliffs would echo the future if you asked politely. You raise an eyebrow. And? She was usually wrong, but occasionally, hilariously right. He flips to a page marked with a smudge of fig and reads aloud, Atop the ridge of time and stone, the donkey will pause, the god will moan, but fruit shall fall, a name be known, and Athens laugh with softened tone. You stare at him. That's almost a poem. It's also a weather report. The oracle was inconsistent. He closes the journal and tosses it back into the cart, where it lands atop the grapes. Then, without explanation, he stands and begins pacing, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. We're close, he mutters. The moment's not quite ripe. And then, as if on cue, you hear it. A rustle, a crack, and a soft thump. A single overripe fig drops from the rock above and lands with a squish on Dionysus's shoulder. He looks down at the stain spreading across his robe, then slowly turns to you. There it is, he says, with the gravity of a high priest, prophecy fulfilled. The donkey opens one eye, regards the fig, and closes it again. A mainstream. Historical note comes to mind. Oracles, while often associated with divine insight, were also brilliant improvisers. Many of their most enduring prophecies were vague riddles or odd natural observations, interpreted after the fact with great enthusiasm. The fig falling on Dionysus's shoulder, a classic example of turning coincidence into cosmic certainty. Dionysus licks the juice from his robe. Sweet, he says. Slightly overdramatic, but sweet. He points to the cart. Time to continue, but slowly. Athens can wait. You load the last of the offerings, left behind by the echo-loving satyrs, who apparently visited while you slept. A wreath of barley, a bone flute, a very small pair of sandals, possibly goat-sized. Dionysus tosses the wreath onto the donkey's head. For your service, Sir Hoofsworth. The donkey brays once, proudly. As the cart rolls forward again, your feet crunch on gravel. The cliffs echo the rhythm of hooves and wheels, softer now like a heartbeat drifting into dreams. And that's when you hear it. A sound that shouldn't be there. Not flute, not hoofbeat. Singing. Far off. Ragged and rhythmic. You squint at the ridge ahead. A group is cresting the hill. Men and women cloaked in travel-worn robes, garlanded in ivy and laughter. One holds a tambourine. Another is drinking straight from a wineskin. They are clearly Dionysus's people. They don't shout. They don't run. They just fall in step behind the cart like they were always meant to. Pilgrims, you ask. Dionysus shakes his head. Participants. Participants in what, you wonder, but don't ask. The answer is already unfolding. They carry no banners. They make no announcements. But the feeling spreads through you, like warm wind or good wine. You are not just traveling. You are arriving, slowly, together, and all around you, the cliffs seem to lean in to listen. A fringe belief from an obscure temple priest flickers through your thoughts, that the closer one walked with Dionysus, the more the world began to imitate his rhythms. Rocks echoed deeper. Figs fell with flair. Songs happened without origin. The universe, just for a while, started to waltz. As you near the ridge's final bend, Athens just beyond it, Dionysus raises his hands. The procession pauses. Even the donkey stops mid-step, eyes half-lidded. We wait, he says again, not for permission, but for punctuation. You exhale, you understand. The arrival doesn't matter unless you've earned the pause, so you wait. With the god, with the donkey, with the wine-sweet wind curling over time and rock. And somewhere far ahead, Athens keeps breathing, waiting too. The sun hangs low and golden as the procession resumes. Donkey cart leading the slow, meandering trail of ivy-crowned wanderers toward the heart of Athens. The city's marble glints in the distance, temples rising like teeth out of the hills, their columns pinked by twilight. But here on the road, the pace remains unhurried. The donkey sets it and everyone follows. You pass through olive groves tended by old men who wave without looking up. Children scamper out from stone courtyards to stare at the procession. Some wave. One throws a fig, which hits the side of the cart and is immediately eaten by Dionysus. He doesn't miss a beat. As you near the edge of the city, a low melody begins. It's not planned. No one gives a signal. It's just one of the followers, an older woman with laugh lines like cracked pottery, humming under her breath. The tune spreads. A hand drum joins in, a set of reed pipes. Someone shakes, a woven rattle, and soon the whole group is humming, swaying. And that's when you notice the satyrs not quite visible, not entirely separate, just enough to be certain they're there. A hoof print in dust that wasn't there a second ago, a low giggle behind a tree, the faint scent of wine-soaked pine. They appear like stage hands slipping behind the curtain, seen. Only if you stare too hard. Dionysus doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. You pass under an arch of cypress trees where the air cools and darkens, and suddenly the donkey stops. Not abruptly, just firmly. His hooves dig in, his ears twitch. Dionysus raises an eyebrow. He remembers. You peer ahead. In the clearing stands a battered statue, stone worn smooth by centuries of wind. It's a simple figure, man and beast. Together, a young Dionysus, arms outstretched, and a donkey beside him, burdened but proud. This, Dionysus says, dismounting the cart, is where I almost left him. You turn. You... What? He kneels before the statue, running his fingers along its base. Moss grows in the crevices. A long time ago, I thought I didn't need him. That I'd outgrown the donkey. I tried to ride a leopard. Didn't go well. Blood everywhere. Fur. In my mouth, leopard was furious, still won't return my sandals. You stifle a laugh. I came back, he continues, voice softer now. Found the donkey here, just waiting, as if I'd never left. You look at the real donkey, who is currently licking a piece of lichen from a nearby rock. He never holds a grudge, Dionysus says, but he never forgets. A mainstream historical detail arises. There are a handful of lesser-known myths and cult tales in which Dionysus briefly abandons the donkey, tempted by symbols of grandeur, and always returns, humbled. Scholars still argue whether these stories were morality tales about loyalty or simply comic relief added by rural poets, but they endure. Dionysus places a grape at the base of the statue, then something stranger, a small cracked wine cup, still damp. He doesn't explain it. Behind you, the followers murmur. Someone begins to sing, not words, just sound, a kind of low, spiraling harmony that feels like the end of something or the beginning of something else, or both. And then, without fanfare, the donkey begins to walk again. You pass from the edge of wildness into the edge of civilization. The olive trees thin, the air changes. You see the city gates ahead, lit with lanterns, guards half asleep beside. Columns. They barely react as you pass. One of them raises a hand in a lazy salute. Dionysus tosses him a fig. The road turns from dust to stone, and the clatter of the cart's wheels becomes musical. The donkey doesn't flinch. He walks as he always has, sure-footed, steady, unbothered by stairs or thresholds. Here's your quirky tidbit. In certain versions of the Dionysian mysteries, it was believed that the true initiate was not the one who drank most deeply or danced most wildly, but the one who arrived last, and with the most dust on their feet. The journey, not the spectacle, was the rite, and so you arrive Athens in all its chaotic, crumbling, cultured glory, welcomes you not with trumpets but with murmurs. Market stalls are closing. Wine sellers still haggle over crates. A child chases. A chicken past the cart. You are just another traveler, and yet you know you've crossed something invisible. The donkey slows outside a modest square near the theater district. Dionysus slides down, stretches, and looks around. This'll do. He sits on the edge of a well. The followers fan out, silently, as if guided by some unseen script. One lights a lantern. Another hangs a wreath on a dozing goat. Someone starts tuning a lyre. "We'll perform here," Dionysus says, picking up a piece of broken pottery and balancing it on his forehead. "It's tradition." You glance around at the cracked walls and empty windows. No audience, he winks. "That's never stopped us before." The donkey kneels, curling into a neat heap like a cat made of hooves and stubbornness. Someone lays a blanket over him. He doesn't move. You sit on the fountain's edge, feet dangling, heart strangely full, and as Dionysus begins to recite something that sounds suspiciously like a tragic comedy written just for the donkey, you feel it. That weird, warm certainty that you've witnessed something ancient and absurd and sacred. Something very boring. Something worth walking for. By morning, the city hums with a different kind of life. Slower, softer. The hush before the day fully stretches its arms. The square is quiet, save for a fruit vendor arranging late-season plums and the sleepy clatter of a broom against flagstones. You wait curled beside the cart, a half-crushed grape stuck to your tunic, and the donkey's warm breath fanning your face. He's still asleep. Of course he is. He earned it. Dionysus, however, is not. You spot him across the square, crouched beside a dusty marble plinth where someone has chalked the words, "Amateur poetry reading, all welcome," in wobbly lettering. He squints at the sign, rubs it. Out with one hand and writes beneath it, "God present, bring wine." You amble over just as a cluster of Athenians, bleary-eyed and toga-wrinkled, begin to wander in, drawn by the scent of ferment and the strange magnetic hum that always trails behind Dionysus. One young man approaches, holding a scroll. "I wasn't expecting an audience," he mutters. Dionysus beams. "Perfect." Neither was Orpheus, and he got turned into birds. He claps the poet on the shoulder. "Read, sing, stumble, whatever your heart prefers. Just mean it." The poet, wide-eyed, unrolls his scroll and begins. The words are tentative at first, but they gain shape. He stammers through a few lines about fig trees and heartache. Somewhere in the back, a donkey brays and the crowd chuckles. Soon, another steps forward, then another. An older woman recites a monologue from memory, each word soft and round, like a stone rolled in a river. A boy sings off-key about a frog that turned into a king. Someone plays a reed pipe so badly, it loops back into being charming. Dionysus listens to each with the same quiet attention. He nods. He snaps. He throws grapes when particularly moved. The donkey, now fully awake and sitting like a grumpy oracle, munches a crust of bread someone offered as a makeshift offering. A mainstream historical truth wanders into the moment. In Athens, public performance wasn't reserved for professionals. It was for citizens, for festivals, for the gods. The line between theatre and religion blurred, especially during Dionysia, annual festivals where tragedies and comedies alike unfolded not in hushed reverence, but in raucous participatory joy. You realize this isn't just a poetry reading. It's an offering, not of incense or coins or elaborate ritual, but of awkward, beautiful, vulnerable creation, the kind of messy honesty Dionysus seems to treasure more than any gold-encrusted shrine. A fringe scholar once wrote that the god of wine was not just about joy or madness, but about the courage to be witnessed, intoxicated not with drink, but with exposure. The courage to speak, sing, perform, even badly, and know you are still part of the divine. The donkey watches a small girl recite a fable she clearly made up on the spot. Something about a jealous fig and a dancing eel. Dionysus roars with delight. He leaps onto a barrel and begins to narrate along, adding sound effects and unnecessary backstory. The square fills. Not all stop to watch. Some just pass through, smiling at the commotion. One grumpy merchant shakes his head. The wine god again? But his tone is more amused than annoyed. As the sun rises higher, the impromptu festival continues. Someone produces olives. Someone else brings more. Wine? Bread is passed, broken, shared without question. A dog joins the donkey beneath the cart's shade. They pretend to ignore each other, but you're pretty sure they're becoming friends. Dionysus climbs down, face flushed with joy, and leans on your shoulder. "We've arrived," he says simply. You nod, though you're not quite sure what. He means. He gestures at the crowd, half drunk, half brilliant, all alive. "This is why I don't fly in on chariots," he says, "why I take the long road. Why I let the donkey decide the pace. He raises a cup to the square. It's not about getting somewhere, he says. It's about letting the world get to you. The donkey brays softly in agreement. You stay until the square empties again, until the chalk fades from the stone, until the last grapes are eaten and the last verse is spoken. And then Dionysus stands, stretches and murmurs, "One more stop." You raise an eyebrow, he smiles. "Time to say thank you."